Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for April 21st, 2021. Well, there's an incredible confluence of events which demonstrate the potential to defeat the oligarchs' geopolitical strategy to use wars and a global banker's dictatorship to consolidate power for their collapsing regime. This is a confluence which is being built by the Schiller Institute, by the LaRouche Organization, around the idea of global cooperation for economic development, as opposed to the use of neoliberal policy, bankers' dictatorship, to enforce backwardness in the name of protecting the climate. Toward this end of defeating the neoliberal geopolitical strategy, the Schiller Institute will be holding a conference on May 8th under the title, "The Moral Collapse of the TransAtlantic World Cries Out for a New Paradigm." This will be an in-depth strategy session to come up with plans to defeat their intent. And I'd urge you to sign up for this, to join us on May 8th. Put this on your calendar because this will be an important turning point that will follow the events we had at a conference 3 weeks ago, which pushed things in the right direction. Now, when I talk about a confluence of events, here are some of the latest developments. On the eve of Joe Biden's Earth Day summit, the 2-day summit to push the Green New Deal globally. First, we deal with the two largest countries in the world in terms of population, India and China. Both have sent out very clear notice that they will not tolerate the depopulation plans, the reversal of modern energy production that's a part of the Green New Deal. The Indian energy minister, as well as the Prime Minister of India, indicated to John Kerry recently that, well, yes, these are noble ideals, but we're not going to sacrifice development for this. The whole point coming from China and India is that development is the key, and projects which will allow for the advance of populations should not be sacrificed at the altar of fake science. Now, one of the latest examples is the president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center, named Bjorn Lomborg, had an op-ed in the China Daily. And here's what he wrote. He wrote, 6 billion not rich people also want access to plentiful and cheap energy, lifting them out of hunger, sickness, and poverty. And he said if the G7 nations try to deprive them of that, things will go badly. Now, it also turned out yesterday that Vladimir Putin agreed that he will address the Biden summit. Putin, of course, has recently pushed the use of clean coal and nuclear energy as the energy alternatives to windmills and solar power. And Putin is going to give a live speech. We don't know exactly what he's going to say, but keep in mind that the U.S. declared economic warfare against Russia last Friday with a round of new sanctions that threaten Russia's ability to engage in trade and commerce and even issuing their own bonds due to sanctions against them. Xi Jinping gave a speech at the Boa Forum where he said we must reject Cold War and zero-sum mentality. Zero-sum mentality? Well, you figure out what that means. But then he came forward and said we must use projects like the Belt and Road Initiative to lift people out of poverty around the world. So we see from Russia, India, and China, three very important and powerful nations, resistance to the idea of signing up for going backward to technologies which are inefficient and which will not provide for the energy needs of the growing population. Now then we have the Mexican ambassador to the United Nations, Juan Ramón de la Fuente, who has an op-ed in El Universal. And what he does in this is echo what Helga Zepp-LaRouche presented in last Wednesday's dialogue with me, where she said that the biggest problem is the indifference of populations to the deliberate policies that create hunger and starvation. Ramon de la Fuente said that he denounced this indifference. And he said that hunger confronts people in at least 30 nations. He said children dying of hunger is today a reality, and it should weigh heavily on the conscience, whether it's simply food scarcity or deliberately imposed scarcity in a veiled reference to the kinds of policies the U.S. is imposing on Syria with the Caesar sanctions. Then we had World Food President Beasley touring South and Central America, Venezuela, Guatemala, Honduras, and he made an extremely important point. 15% of the people in Central America, he said, plan to migrate in 2021. That's 6 million people. Where are they going to go? Well, I think we know where most of them will go. And it's due to food scarcity and lack of employment, which will be worsened if the Green New Deal is adopted. Beasley said if they have food and livelihood security, they will stay home. He said if you don't feed people, you are feeding conflicts. Well, these are all extremely important examples. There are many more that I could give you, but the point is that the world is not going to tolerate a fake science imposition of a global banker's dictatorship that will cut credit to economic growth and production. Now, what's the Biden administration's approach to this? Well, let's take a look at the completely unbalanced maniac, Tony Blinken, who took time off on April 19th from defending the sanctions killing the children in Syria to push Greta Thunberg's line that we're running out of time to avoid, quote, climate catastrophe, unquote. And he said there is no alternative to eliminating greenhouse gases and reducing carbon emissions to zero. And he said if these policies are not adopted, which means doing away with power produced by coal and fossil fuel as a starting point, then we won't have much of a world left. This from Blinken, who is following in the footsteps of the thug Mike Pompeo in threatening countries with war, with scarcity, with sanctions. And this coming from Blinken on the eve of Biden's summit is fairly ominous because it's setting up the likelihood of a confrontation at that event. Also, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, announced a new office in the U.S. Treasury Department to accelerate the economic transition away from fossil fuels. This is in keeping with the Davos policy that was announced at the World Economic Forum in January of financial regime change, which unites the Great Reset with the Green New Deal. In other words, the financial regime change is that banks will cut off credit to any company which has a carbon footprint and will instead only produce funds, that is, print money, that will go into a green financial bubble. The idea that you can take away the threat of a collapse of the unsustainable debt bubble by creating a new bubble is pure craziness. And yet that's what Yellen is announcing with this creation of a climate czar within the Treasury Department. So the important point is we can win this fight. We need a commitment of a small section of the population to fight with ideas against the thuggery and craziness that uses censorship of scientists, censorship of political opposition, that won't tell you that countries around the world are rejecting this. So come to us, to the Schiller Institute, join our mobilization, sign up for our May 8th conference, become part of a solution that represents the commitment to restore to our nation the traditions of the American Constitutional Republic of investment in physical economy for the future, essentially in infrastructure, new platforms of infrastructure, and in areas of the frontiers of science and technology. That's the solution: increased productivity, increased energy flux density. That's Lyndon LaRouche's unique solution to what otherwise is being turned into a real climate crisis, of mass starvation and wars, supported by the likes of Tony Blinken and the ghouls from the British intelligence agencies that are pushing geopolitics and neoliberal policy. So join me again tomorrow where we follow up this report. We'll see what else develops in the next 24 hours. Thanks for joining me, and share this video. Help build up the consensus for an anti-Malthusian resistance movement.